She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't say a single word. She simply removed her wedding ring, placed it beside the shattered watch she had brought him as an anniversary gift, and walked out of his life forever. No drama. No tears. No second chances. Just silence. The most devastating kind. This is the story of Amara Brooks Kang, a woman who gave everything to a man who had everything and still chose to throw it all away. 5 years before the night that broke everything, Amara had been standing in a crowded ballroom in Seoul, wearing a gold dress that caught the chandelier light, her hand wrapped tightly inside Kang Min-joy's. She remembered how nervous she'd been, the stares, the whispers, the polite smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes of Korea's most powerful socialites. She had felt it all, every judgment, every silent question hanging in the room like smoke. Why her? Why had the future CEO of Kang Group, one of South Korea's most powerful conglomerates, married a black American woman from Atlanta, Georgia? Where was the carefully selected daughter of a rival chaebol family? Where was the arrangement that was supposed to happen? Min-jae had felt Amara tense beside him. He leaned down and whispered into her ear. Ignore them. Every single one of them. Then he lifted her hand and kissed it in full view of the room. The message was clear and absolute. She was his wife. She belonged there. Anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with the Kang Group's legal department. Amara had laughed, really laughed, and in that moment, she had believed with her whole heart that this man was going to love her for the rest of her life. She wasn't wrong about his love. She was only wrong about his strength. Amara had not come to Seoul as someone who needed to be carried. She was an architect with a sharp eye and a sharper mind. She had graduated at the top of her class at Georgia Tech, had already been making a name for herself in sustainable design, when Min-jae walked into an international business conference in New York, saw her presenting her firm's eco-concept project, and quietly decided that he had never seen anyone so extraordinary in his entire life. He courted her for 8 months before she said yes to a first date, another 6 before she agreed to a relationship. She was not a woman who rushed into anything. When she finally agreed to marry him and move to Seoul, she did it with full awareness that she was stepping into a world that had not been built with her in mind. So she built herself into it. She studied Korean every morning before Min-jae woke up. She learned the customs, the honorifics, the unspoken social codes. She attended every company event at his side, remembered the names of board members' wives, asked about their children, their parents. She organized charity initiatives under the Kang Group banner that raised billions of won for education programs across 3 provinces. She did not do these things to be accepted. She did them because she was Amara, a woman who poured herself completely into everything she loved. And she loved Min-jae completely. There were hard days, of course, days when the loneliness of being far from home pressed down on her chest like a stone. Days when she missed her mother's voice, her college friends, the particular way Atlanta smelled after summer rain. Seoul was beautiful and electric and relentless, but it was not home in the way home is supposed to feel, warm and easy and forgiving. That was how she met Han Seo-rin. It was at a charity gala 8 months after the wedding. Amara had been standing near the dessert table, pretending to be absorbed in selecting between 2 identical macarons, when a voice beside her said, in perfectly accented English, "The pistachio one. Always the pistachio one. The rose ones look beautiful, but they taste like disappointment." Amara had turned to find a striking Korean woman in a dark emerald gown, laughing at her own joke. Her name was Han Seo-rin. She was the executive director of a Seoul fashion house, sharp and glamorous and completely disarming. Unlike most of the women Amara had encountered in these circles, Seo-rin had not looked at her with polite coldness or veiled curiosity. She had looked at her like she was interesting. Within weeks, they were having lunch every Tuesday. Within months, Seo Rin was teaching Amara the best street food spots hidden in Insadong, the flower markets that opened. Before dawn, the restaurant tucked behind a convenience store in Mapogu that only locals knew. She celebrated Amara's birthday with more enthusiasm than anyone except Min Jai. She sat with her through 2 difficult miscarriages and never once said the wrong thing. She was the sister Amara had never had. Amara gave her a spare key to their home. She told Seo Rin things she had never told another soul. She trusted her with everything. That was the first tragedy of this story, not the betrayal itself, but the intimacy that made it possible. Because while Amara saw a sister, Seo Rin saw something else entirely. Seo Rin had known who Kang Min-jae was long before she met Amara. She had seen him at industry events. She had admired him from across rooms. He was the kind of man women in their circles spoke about in careful, reverent tones. Powerful, handsome, quietly commanding. The kind of man who made you feel like the only person in the room when he looked at you. And he had chosen Amara. Seo Rin had watched their relationship from the outside with an expression no one could read. Not jealousy exactly, not admiration exactly. Something colder, something patient, something that was waiting. She befriended Amara first because Amara was the door. She made herself indispensable slowly, the way water erodes stone, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, until one day, you look and the stone has changed shape, and you cannot remember when it happened. She began positioning herself at company events, volunteering to assist with Kang Group's charity initiatives, the very ones Amara had created. She made herself useful to Min-jae in small ways. A contact here, a favor there. A business dinner suggestion that saved him an awkward negotiation. She was always present, always helpful, always perfectly positioned. And when Min-jae began changing, when the business empire expanded internationally and the pressure multiplied and the evenings at home grew shorter, Seo Rin was exactly where she had planned to be. The change in Min-jae had started gradually, the way these things always do. He began missing dinners, then anniversaries, then whole weekends. The international expansion of Kang Group had opened offices in Singapore, Dubai, and Frankfurt. And with those openings came a new version of Min-jae, one who answered emails at 2 in the morning, who looked through Amara at breakfast rather than at her, who said, "I'll make it up to you." So many times the words had been scraped clean of meaning. Amara tried. God, she tried. She rearranged her schedule to be home when he was home. She stopped mentioning the missed dates because she didn't want to add to his stress. She told herself this was a season, not a permanence, that the man who had kissed her hand in front of Korea's most powerful room was still inside the distracted stranger who came home at midnight and fell asleep mid-sentence. She believed in him even when he had stopped showing up. Seo Rin, meanwhile, had become the person Min-jae saw most consistently. She attended the company events Amara's schedule sometimes prevented her from joining. She handled logistics for charity galas. She sat across from him at business dinners and listened, really listened, with an intensity that felt, in those exhausted and pressured moments, like water in a desert. She told him he was remarkable. She told him he was underappreciated. She told him that not everyone would have had the courage and vision he had demonstrated in building the empire he had built. She never mentioned Amara. Min-jae had not gone looking for what happened. That was the complicated, ugly truth that made the betrayal even harder to dissect. He hadn't sought it. He had simply been tired and flattered and weak, and Seo Rin had spent 18 months engineering the precise conditions under which a weak moment would become something irreversible. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening at his penthouse office in Gangnam. They had been reviewing international expansion documents. The city was dark and wet outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Seo Rin had poured them both a glass of wine she had brought without being asked. She had sat close, closer than necessary, and when Minjae had turned to say something about the Singapore projections, she had looked at him in a way that made the sentence disappear from his mind entirely. He should have stood up. He should have said goodnight. He should have called his wife. He did none of those things. And from that rainy Tuesday onward, everything that was already broken in his marriage began falling through the floor. Their 5th wedding anniversary fell on a Thursday. Minjae told Amara that morning, over a breakfast he barely touched, that he was sorry. There was an emergency board meeting. The Singapore acquisition had hit a complication. It would go late. He would make it up to her. He always made it up to her. Amara smiled the way she had learned to smile, quietly, with her eyes doing something different from her mouth. She had already planned the surprise 3 weeks ago. His favorite meal, galbi jim and the jasmine rice he loved, the kind his mother used to make, a bottle of the wine from the region in France where they had spent their honeymoon, and the watch, a custom timepiece she had spent 4 months commissioning from a craftsman in Switzerland. Rose gold, his initials on the face, and on the inside of the clasp, engraved in letters so small you had to know to look for them. Forever begins again. She had smiled to herself while wrapping it, thinking about how he would look when he read the inscription, how he would pull her close, how they would start over. She took a taxi to the Kang Group Tower at 9:30 that evening. The security guard at the lobby recognized her immediately and stepped aside. The receptionist on the executive floor looked up when the elevator opened and did something with her face that Amara could not quite interpret at the time. A flash of something. Surprise. Unease. "Mr. Kang is upstairs," the receptionist said, and her voice had a strange quality to it. Careful. Like someone selecting words with too much deliberateness. Amara smiled and thanked her, and walked toward the private staircase to the penthouse floor. She heard the laughter before she reached the door. A woman's laugh. Familiar. A laugh she had heard hundreds of times, across hundreds of lunches and late-night conversations and birthday celebrations. The penthouse door was slightly ajar. A sliver of warm light fell across the marble hallway floor. Amara pushed it open slowly. The watch was in her hand. Her heart was already doing something strange. Not racing, just contracting, pulling tight, as if her body understood before her mind had finished processing what her eyes were seeing. Minjae. Seo Rin, his hand in her hair, her face turned up toward his. The closeness between them so complete that there was no space left for misinterpretation, no alternative explanation that could survive even a second of consideration. The watch slipped from Amara's hand. It hit the marble floor with a sound that rang through the entire room, sharp and final, like the last note of a song. They turned. 3 people stood in a frozen architecture of consequence. Minjae, his face draining of color. Seo Rin, something unreadable moving across her expression. And Amara, who was completely, absolutely still. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not ask why or how long or what she meant to him. She did not throw anything or demand an explanation or collapse. None of those things came to her. What came to her was a terrible, ringing clarity. She looked at Minjae for a long, quiet moment. Then she looked at Seo Rin. Then she looked down at the watch on the floor. The watch she had spent 4 months making. The watch she had carried across the city tonight because she still believed in forever. She bent down, picked it up, set it on the table by the door. Then she removed her wedding ring. Not with anger, not with theatrics, with the slow, deliberate movement of a woman who has just understood something that cannot be unknown. She set the ring beside the watch. Then she walked out. Minjae found his voice somewhere behind her. "Amara." It came out broken, inadequate, too small for the size of what he had done. She didn't slow down. She pressed the elevator button, stepped inside, watched the doors close over the image of him standing in the hallway with destruction all over his face, and then she was gone. That night, she went home, moved through the rooms of the life she had built in this country with precise, quiet efficiency, and packed 2 suitcases. Not everything, just what mattered. Her design portfolio, her mother's photograph, the silk scarf she had bought on her first solo day exploring Seoul when the city had still felt like an adventure and not a cage. She did not sleep. By 4 in the morning, she was at a hotel near Incheon Airport. By 5, she had called her lawyer in Atlanta. By 6, the divorce papers were being prepared. She filled out her section of the documentation with the same methodical precision she brought to architectural blueprints, clearly, completely, leaving nothing ambiguous. She did not request alimony. She did not request the properties. She did not want his money. She had never wanted his money. She left a handwritten note in an envelope on the dining table for when he came home, and she wrote it in Korean, the language she had learned for him, the language that was now also hers. The note said, "You didn't lose me yesterday. You lost me every time you chose someone else over our marriage. Yesterday was simply the day I stopped pretending." Then she sealed the envelope, set it on the table between a vase of the white orchids she had arranged 2 days ago for an anniversary she thought they were going to celebrate together, and she walked out of the front door without looking back. She was in the air before Min Jae's car pulled into their driveway. He found the envelope. He read the note 3 times. Then he called her phone. And again. And again. He called 18 times before he accepted that she wasn't going to answer. Then he went to the airport and was told her flight had landed in Los Angeles 40 minutes ago. She was gone. Back in Seoul, Seo-rin moved through the transformation with a speed that might have looked, to a casual observer, like eagerness. Within weeks of Amara's departure, she had settled into the Kong mansion with an efficiency that suggested she had been waiting a long time to do exactly this. She replaced furniture. She hired new staff. She instructed them on her preferences with the authority of someone who had finally been given what they deserved. But the woman who had spent 18 months being warm and patient and strategic seemed to dissolve the moment she got what she wanted. She criticized Min Jae constantly, his decisions, his schedule, his management style. She demanded luxury cars and a corporate card with no limit, and a dedicated team of stylists for her personal appearances. She wanted control over the company's public events and made it clear to his executive team that going through her was now the preferred path to Min Jae. Min Jae watched the transformation with the particular horror of a man seeing consequences materialize in real time. This was not love. He could see that now, with a clarity that felt almost cruel in how late it had arrived. This was acquisition. He had been a target, an extraordinarily well-resourced target, and he had walked directly into the arrangement with his eyes open, believing the warmth was real. He thought about Amara constantly. He thought about the woman who had learned his language for him, who had stayed up with him through 2 failed acquisitions, making tea and asking sharp questions until they found the solution together, who had organized an entire children's hospital fundraiser in her 2nd year in Korea because she had visited a ward and come home silent and determined. He thought about who Amara was, really was, and the understanding of what he had destroyed arrived in waves, each one worse than the last. He tried calling again, 3 months after she left. Her number had been changed. He tried email, no response. He reached out through a mutual contact in New York. The message that came back was polite, brief, and absolute. She wishes you well. She has nothing further to say. He understood. He did not try again. What he did not know, could not have known, was how completely Amara had rebuilt herself. She returned to Atlanta and stayed with her mother for exactly 3 weeks. Then she rented a studio apartment, called the 2 former colleagues she trusted most, and told them she was starting something new. Something she should have built years ago. A firm of her own, from the ground up, built entirely on her terms. She called it Amara Brooks Design, which people sometimes told her was a bold choice of name, and she always smiled and said, "Yes, that's the point." The firm specialized in eco-luxury architecture, sustainable materials, innovative structural concepts, and designs that were simultaneously functional and breathtaking. She had spent years watching the world's wealthiest people build, without conscience, materials stripped from ecosystems, carbon footprints the size of small nations, beauty purchased at the planet's expense. She was going to show the world that those things did not have to be in conflict. Her first project was a residential complex in Denver. Her second was a mixed-use development in Lisbon, commissioned by a European sustainability fund. Her third was a cultural arts center in Accra that won 3 international architectural awards and landed her on the cover of Architectural Digest. International investors came. Major commissions followed. A boutique resort in Tuscany, a corporate campus in Toronto, a public library in Cape Town designed entirely from reclaimed materials that the local council said made children want to visit a library for the first time in their lives. Within 4 years, Amara Brooks Design had offices on 3 continents and a portfolio that was reshaping conversations about what luxury architecture could be. She was invited to lecture at MIT, at the Royal Academy, at the University of Lagos. She sat on sustainability councils and innovation boards. She also quietly found joy again. Not the performed happiness she had maintained in the last difficult years of her marriage. Not the smile that was really just a decision to keep going. Real joy. The kind that came from building something that was entirely, authentically hers. From morning runs along the Piedmont Park Trail, from her mother's cooking on Sunday evenings, from the particular satisfaction of watching a design she had conceived on paper rise into the skyline as something permanent and real. She was not looking for love. Love could wait. She was not against love. She had too much capacity for it to be against it. But she had learned the difference between love and need, and she was no longer willing to mistake one for the other. Meanwhile, in Seoul, the catastrophe that had been building in Min Jae's life finally arrived. Seo Rin, it turned out, had not only destroyed his marriage, she had been systematically extracting confidential information from Kang Group's proprietary files for the better part of 2 years, strategic documents, acquisition targets, R&D pipelines, and selling them to one of Kang Group's primary competitors in exchange for a figure that investigators later confirmed exceeded $40 million. When the leak was discovered, it moved through the company like a fault line cracking open. Investors pulled funding within days. The board convened an emergency session that lasted 14 hours. Regulatory bodies opened formal inquiries. Stock value dropped so dramatically that financial analysts described it as one of the most damaging corporate espionage events in Korean business history. Min Jae resigned. He had no real choice. The mansion was liquidated. The cars were repossessed. The social circle that had surrounded him for a decade, the powerful friends, the industry allies, the people who had attended his parties and praised his vision, disappeared with a speed that would have been almost impressive if it hadn't been so devastating. Seo Rin was gone before the investigators knew where to look. She had transferred the funds to offshore accounts over 18 months and purchased a property overseas under a name that took authorities considerable time to trace. She was eventually found and faced legal proceedings, but by then the damage to Min Jae was irreversible. His company was restructured under new management. His reputation was in ruins. He sat alone in a rented apartment in a quieter part of Seoul that he would never have noticed when he had been the most powerful man in the room, and he thought about everything he had lost. Not the company. Not the mansion. Not the status. Amara. He thought about the note she had left him. The one she had written in Korean, his language, because she had learned his language for him. And the precision of what she had said. You lost me every time you chose someone else. She had been so much wiser than he was. She had seen the marriage ending in slow motion and held on until she could not hold any longer. And then she had left with a grace and a dignity that he did not deserve. 5 years after that anniversary night, the Global Architecture and Innovation Summit was held in Singapore. It was one of the most significant gatherings in the international design and urban development world. 3,000 delegates, keynote speakers drawn from the most celebrated names in contemporary architecture. Min Jae had been invited to attend as a guest of one of the engineering firms that had retained him as a consultant in his rebuild. He almost hadn't come. He almost didn't, because sitting in rooms full of successful people was still something that required deliberate effort when you had spent 2 years rebuilding your sense of who you were without the company that had defined you. But he came. He was seated near the front of the main auditorium when the conference moderator walked to the podium to introduce the evening's keynote speaker. He listened to the introduction with the half-presence of a man still negotiating with himself about whether he should have ordered the fish or the chicken at dinner. And then the name, Amara Brooks. He went completely still. She walked onto the stage in a crimson designer gown that moved with her like water, and the auditorium rose, all 3,000 people rising for a standing ovation before she had said a single word. She stood at the podium and smiled, and it was not the smile he remembered from the last years of their marriage, the careful, quiet one that never quite reached her eyes. This was something different. This was a woman who was completely, entirely at home in herself. She spoke for 40 minutes about the future of sustainable luxury design, about the obligation of architects to build with conscience, about the capacity of beautiful spaces to change the way human beings feel about their own potential. She was funny and precise and visionary. The room was completely absorbed. Min Jae could not have looked away if the building had been on fire. When she finished, the ovation was thunderous. He found her afterward in the reception hall, moving through congratulations and handshakes, with the ease of someone who had been living in her own power for a long time. He waited until there was a gap, and then he walked toward her, and something crossed her face when she recognized him. Not shock, not pain, not anger. Just a quiet acknowledgement of someone she had once known. Amara. Min Jae. I'm sorry, he said, because it was the only true thing he had, and it was years too late, and he knew both of those things. I know, she said. I never stopped. Min Jae. Her voice was gentle, not cruel, not cold, just finished. I stopped waiting a long time ago. She extended her hand. He shook it. It was the handshake of two people who had been something enormous to each other and had come out the other side of it as strangers, not with hatred, not with longing, just with the quiet distance of a chapter that had fully closed. I truly hope you find peace, she said, and she meant it. He could tell she meant it, which somehow made everything worse and better at the same time. Then she smiled, and she turned, and she walked toward the exit. Outside the glass doors, a man was waiting for her, distinguished, warm, the kind of man who looked at a woman the way she deserved to be looked at. When he saw her, he straightened slightly, the way people do when someone walks into a room and the room improves. She reached him, and he said something that made her laugh, really laugh, the full version. And he took her hand, and they walked out together into the Singapore evening, disappearing into the light. Min Jae stood alone in the middle of the reception hall, surrounded by 3,000 people, and understood something so clearly it was almost physical. He had not lost Amara on that anniversary evening in his penthouse office. He had lost her across 1,000 smaller moments. Every dinner he missed, every birthday he forgot, every time he chose the easier comfort of flattery over the harder work of love. He had lost her incrementally, the way you lose light when the sun goes down, so gradually you barely notice until you're standing in the dark. And some doors, once closed, do not open again. Not because the person behind them is incapable of forgiveness. Amara had forgiven him, he could see that. But because forgiveness and return are not the same thing. Because a woman who has built herself a life that is full and authentic and entirely her own has no reason to trade it for a history that already showed her its worst. She had not needed revenge. She had not needed his downfall. She had not even needed an apology, though she received one. She had needed only herself. And she had that. She had always had that. She had simply spent 5 years in Seoul forgetting it, and the rest of her life remembering. If this story moved you, if you felt something in the quiet moment when Amara set down that wedding ring, please take 1 second to hit the like button, because it helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you never miss what comes next. And drop a comment telling us, at what moment did you know Amara had already won? We read every single one.